Commissioner Killeen, are you here?
I am here, yes.
Commissioner Hamilton, are you here?
Yes.
Commissioner Vines, are you here?
Yes.
Is there a commissioner present that I don't see? Okay. Commissioners, I'm going to hold off on approval of the January minutes until we get more commissioners here. Looking at our agenda and judging from the phone calls I've gotten, there is more interest in agenda item A than in any other agenda items. And commissioners who expressed interest in agenda item A are parking or on their way up, but they do not want to delay the start of this meeting. So I'd like to begin, unless you object, with agenda item B. Okay?
Skip.
Yep.
Yep. Okay. So we will quickly go through agenda item B, which is 3012 Longfellow.
I'll be quick as possible, I promise. This is a prelim for a new construction, single-family house over in Compton Hill. This is the very green site. I know it's not a very great picture, but this is looking south on Russell towards Longfellow. This is the locale of the construction. It's on a kind of pie-shaped parcel. This is the actual parcel itself. It's kind of an odd-shaped area to work with. It's been empty since the area was developed, so it's kind of it's the first time a house has been on that site before. There's an aerial showing. We're looking south, so it's going to be right in there. So now you got enough context, right? Okay. But you can see here we have a wide variety of styles, roof shapes, 3 stories, 2 stories, 3 stories, a whole wide variety of stuff. Here's the proposed site plan. Along Russell, there's kind of a varied array of setbacks along here, but it aligns along with that generally, so that meets the ordinance in Compton Hill for setbacks. As you can see also while you're here, this is where the fencing will align. They're kind of coming off the sides here towards the houses, and they won't kind of spread out that way. Here's the context, kind of showing the varied brick colors, shapes, styles of buildings along Longfellow on the east side, so the house will sit right back up in this area. There. This is across Longfellow, again, wide variety of styles of buildings. This is along Russell. The house will be at the right edge of the screen here. That's where the house will be going. So again, 1 stories, 2 stories, 2.5 stories, all kinds of stuff. This is the proposed elevation on the north side. It will be brick. We have met with the neighborhood, the architect, and the owners, and this is the design that has been agreed upon for all parties involved. We think it's a great design and will fit well within the neighborhood. This is the east side. This will be all brick. Other side and the west side, all brick, and then there will be some siding back here will not be street visible because of the way the lot is set up. It will be the same color of the brick, so it'll all be the same color. Brick wrap around the back a little bit over here and over here, so again, your sightlines will be mostly brick. In terms of your massing, how they line up, it meets the ordinance. It's hard to read, but this is along Longfellow, then along Russell, along the other street. So mass-wise, it meets the ordinance. Material, setback, scale, it all complies with the ordinance. This is a rendering of what's going on. It will be actually a buff or yellow brick. This gives you a sense of what it will look like. And this is the brick color they're trying to match that's in the neighborhood itself. So given that, staff recommends that, oh, I'm sorry, I have a letter from the neighborhood. I need to enter into the record real quick. The neighborhood feels that it does meet the ordinance. This is that letter, it says that. So again, we recommend preliminary approval.
Okay. Questions? Questions? Thank you. For the record, Counselor, Commissioner Killeen has recused himself from consideration on this matter. We have people signed up to testify. Mr. Killeen. And you may arrange your presenters in any order that you want to.
Okay, do I need to swear in? Or?
Nope.
No. So, Mr. Chairman, I guess I would just say at this point, does the board have any questions for us?
Randy?
I do not.
Tiffany?
No.
We do not.
Thank you.
Okay. Are the rest of these people your people as well?
And I think they have the same question. So that's our whole presentation.
Excellent. Well done.
Thank you.
Tiffany, looking at page 11, you got a motion to make.
Yes. My motion is that the Preservation Board grant preliminary approval of the new building as proposed with the stipulation that final plans and materials are reviewed and approved by the Cultural Resources Office.
Second?
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Is there any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? The motion carries. The record show that Commissioner Kennedy is now present, and let's take up agenda item A.
It's brilliant. It's skated through that one. Was that always a vacant lot?
So, this is item A, 300 South Broadway. This is a proposal for demolition of a 6-story office building and proposal to construct in its place a 33-story high-rise apartment tower. The recommendation from the staff is that the Preservation Board grant preliminary approval of the demolition of the building for the construction of the high-rise apartment building with the condition that demolition approval is withheld unless the Cultural Resources Office is presented with a construction permit approved by the Building Division that reflects the plans presented to the Preservation Board, the documentation of construction financing. I have some items for the board to look at. One set of letters from the public, some in support, some in opposition. And then I have copies of the redevelopment, or an excerpt from the redevelopment plan and the blighting study that went with this project.
What's the status of that plan?
That plan has been approved by the Board of Aldermen, been through LCRA and the Planning Commission with support, and is awaiting the mayor's signature.
Okay, so there's no ordinance number yet.
It is not an ordinance yet, and that is reflected in the way the staff wrote the staff report.
Cool.
I'd like to recap this, as I'm sure everyone here pretty much realizes. This item appeared at the December Preservation Board meeting where it was considered as a preliminary review. And at that meeting, the board granted preliminary approval for the demolition with some stipulations. That the original Clark and Broadway facades of the 1890s building be retained and incorporated into the tower design. The apartment tower must have at least 75% glass facade. The final design and materials be approved by the Preservation Board, and that the demolition approval is withheld until a building permit is approved. So why are we back here again if we've already looked at this? The bylaws for preliminary reviews, or the policy for preliminary reviews of the Preservation Board, allow that if there's a change in plans or a change in circumstances surrounding a plan, that plan can come back. And we have a significant change in the conditions upon which we will review this proposal today that are reflected in the fact that this is now part of a redevelopment plan, as I said, that's been approved by the Plan Commission and the LCRA, as well as by the full body of the Board of Aldermen as a board bill. So now I'd like to show some slides of the site. Here we see the primary facade of the building along Broadway. It's a 6-bay wide building on Broadway. The 3 bays to the north there are from the late 1890s. The 3 bays to the south are almost an exact replica of the part to the north that was constructed in the mid-1980s. While I'm here, I'll talk a little bit about the facade and the history of the building. The building was always the height that you see here. Originally, there was a wall on the south side of the building that, from plans that we have seen, had no real architectural articulation. It was just a brick wall with punched windows in it. That facade was obscured when the building was expanded in the 1980s. Other ways that the building has been changed are all the windows are no longer original and are not the style of windows that were originally approved. And the storefronts down here, except for the pillars, are not original either. Those were changed when the building was expanded. So this is a map showing the site. You see in red is where the demolition is proposed. Across the street is Busch Stadium on the other side of Broadway. The building also extends down Clark Avenue as well. This is the Clark Avenue facade. As I said, when the building was expanded in the 1980s, the street visible facades were expanded in a way that almost exactly replicated the historic structure, which is not, I would say, a common way to expand a historic building, but is what was done in this case. This bay at the end on Clark Street was previously an alley, so that is an addition from the 1980s, although it is almost indistinguishable from the rest of the facade. A couple other changes that did happen in the 1980s. There were some loading docks here with some larger doors to accommodate bringing in materials, supplies, and such. This is the proposed redevelopment of the site. The Broadway facade, as you see, the applicant has come back with the same proposal they brought last time. So there's a glass curtain wall on Broadway. The lower levels of that here are for parking. The other three facades, the east facade, the north facade, and the south facade, are concrete with punched windows. That's the north facade on the right, and it has balconies as well. There you see the south elevation on the right and the east elevation on the left. The building, of course, as you'll see in a moment, extends above the Tums manufacturing facility, which is shown in the lower portions of the building and shall remain extant if this project is approved. This again is another look at the front facade. And with that, we'll look at some more of the context. This is looking north on Broadway. You see the Tums facility next to the building that's proposed for demolition, which dates from approximately the same period as the building proposed for demolition. This is looking directly across the street, across Broadway at the ballpark. I think it's noteworthy in terms of context that what's really across the street from this site is not what we typically think of when we think of the new Busch Stadium as being a tall structure with brick facades. What is actually here is low-slung buildings for concessions, and additionally the rear of the scoreboards for the stadium. So the context here is a little bit different than the other sort of 75% of the ballpark facade as it wraps around in a circular way. This is a view looking west, catty corner from our site that we're considering today at Ballpark Village. I think it's noteworthy that there is another residential tower that's under construction. This is a rendering of that. Now, unfortunately, this rendering does not show the exact corner. So the corner where we would be looking is over here. This is actually Clark Street. But you can see from this illustration, sort of the character is very contemporary, and I think that would match in a way the contemporary design of the building proposed for construction at 300 South Broadway. Additional context, so this is Spruce Street looking west. Again, you see the ballpark and those scoreboards in the background.
Dan, Twitter wants you to speak up.
I'm sorry?
Twitter wants you to speak up.
Okay, I don't normally talk to Twitter, but I will speak louder. Usually that's not what people are telling me.
They also want the heat down, but I know there's nothing you can do about that.
There is nothing I can do about that. So this is the Spruce facade. Again, this is Tums manufacturing facility buildings. Our building is kind of catty corner at the other end of this city block. We are looking at 4th Street in the foreground. This is the Tums building. Again, this is a very interesting modern structure that's part of the Tums complex. Here we see the Stadium East Garage. The Millennium Hotel would be off to our right in this picture. This is looking east on Clark Street. You can see, so just to illustrate my point here. This bay is from the 1980s. And everything on this side, in terms of the facade, except for the window treatments and the storefronts, is original to the building in the 1890s. It's interesting that the facade along Clark is a street-facing facade, but it's really treated in a lot of ways as a secondary facade. You see there are exhaust vents and kind of smaller punched windows here. So this facade along Clark of the existing structures for the Tums facility really play more as an alley-type facade than as a street-facing one. And once again, we're around to the front of the building at 300 South Broadway. So now that we've looked at the site, I just wanted to quickly give an overview of the staff recommendation and dive into that a little bit more. The criteria in the Preservation Review District Ordinance, which we're using today as part of Ordinance 64689 and Ordinance 64832, are weighted in importance. And the Preservation Board members are familiar with this from all the demolition reviews we've done. What makes this demolition review different is it is relatively unusual for a redevelopment plan approved by LCRA, the Planning Commission, Board of Aldermen, et cetera, to call for the demolition of a building. And in this case, that's exactly what's been done. So what I would argue to the board today is that the ordinance calls for the demolition of the building. And the ordinance states that if...
Mr. Director?
Yes.
The plan, not the ordinance, right?
Oh, the plan. The real question, and I really think almost the only question for the board today is, are there unusual circumstances for why this building should not be demolished as called for in the board bill? And I would say I have not been able to identify any circumstances. Yes, the building is a very attractive building. Yes, it is, in my opinion, eligible for the National Register and therefore a high merit building. But still, the fact is that the public bodies in place to review redevelopment proposals have voted to approve the demolition of the structure. And you can see in the write-up about the history of the building, but I would still argue that the ordinance calls for its demolition. I'm not really going to go into the rest of the criteria in much depth.
Mr. Director?
Yes,
Again, what called for the demolition?
the board bill.
I just got an eyebrow from the lawyer, so,
Oh, okay. Well, I stand corrected.
again.
Again, yes, you are correct in that. So you can read the rest of the staff write-up, but I really feel like the criteria here, we're really talking about the first criteria primarily and whether or not there are unusual circumstances. And with that, I will stop and take any questions from the board.
Any questions?
Could you refresh our memory from the last time that they presented? I think that was last month. So,
2 months.
has it been 2 months? Okay. What made this an unusual circumstance enough that you wanted to see, that you agreed with their request for a demolition?
I felt in my previous recommendation that the unusual circumstances were met to support the demolition for a few reasons. One is I felt in that recommendation that the benefit to downtown of having the new structure with all those new residents and new retail along Broadway would be particularly beneficial. The fact is that I think our downtown could use more residents and more businesses and more vibrancy. Yes, we get a lot of activity here, a lot of it generated by the ballpark, which isn't active 365 days a year. So I think I still believe this, but it's not really as germane anymore. I feel like the increased activity would be beneficial for downtown. And this building doesn't generate a lot of activity, isn't the same kind of activity as an office building. Today, I would say the other unusual circumstance is that the design of the building has been compromised by the window changes and the storefront changes. And, on the Broadway facade, which is really the primary facade, it's been doubled in size from the historic structure with the new structure. So those were my reasons previously. But as I said, the criteria review last time was silent on whether there was a redevelopment plan that called for the building's demolition and a board bill that called for the building's demolition, and we have that here.
Now, we approved demolition last time, didn't we?
You did, but with stipulations that are not in accordance with what was approved in the redevelopment plan. The redevelopment plan calls for the entire demolition of the building now, not retaining the facades as was called for in the December decision of the Preservation Board.
So which of the, what were the conditions that the board placed last time?
The conditions were, number one, that the 1890s facades be supported during the rest of the demolition and then reused as part of the base of the building for the parking. Number two, that on the new structure above the height of the parking, that the facades have at least 75% glass curtain wall, and that there be the Preservation Board get another look at the design, and that there be an approved building permit in accordance with that design before the demolition could be approved.
And which of those conditions does the redevelopment plan allow, if any?
The redevelopment plan is silent on bringing the plans in any way back to the Preservation Board. The redevelopment plan is silent on whether or not there needs to be an approved that there needs to be an approved building permit before the demolition can be allowed. The redevelopment plan does not call for the glass curtain wall portions, and the redevelopment plan does call for the entire demolition of the building without any kind of allowance for retaining the original facades, the board bill, and the redevelopment plan.
Okay. Further questions?
What was the vote on that, do you know?
I think
County,
the
maybe, you know?
vote was 3-2, if I remember correctly, but I don't have the exact.
Thank you.
Well, the minutes were from December, though.
No, I mean, at the Board of Aldermen.
Oh, the vote at the Board of Aldermen, I believe, was 18-8.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
This may have just been answered, but just for the record, oh, I'm sorry.
You have a question?
Oh, yes, I do, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
So what's that noise?
You may have just answered this, but just for the record, for clarification, the recommendations, or the decision of the Preservation Board the first time around asked for certain considerations to be made in order to grant the demo permit. So it's coming back to us now after having gone through the redevelopment proposal with zero consideration to any of those recommendations. Is that correct? So there's zero revisions of any design plan at all. It's the exact same plan as we saw the first time, correct?
Yes.
No further questions.
Thank you. Okay, let's have the applicants. Who's the ringleader? The moderator, the leader. Collector, you okay waiting 10 seconds?
Go. My name is Jim Fredericks. I am the attorney at Armstrong Teasdale, and I represent the applicant, the developer, who is a local joint venture with the Chicago joint venture. We discussed that, the relationships, and everybody understands what we're building and what why we're here today. The Cultural Resources Office made a recommendation, and we brought it to the Preservation Board the last time, and you are absolutely right, Randy, that there were conditions that were put on there. One was to save the facade and reuse it. The other one was to put put glass around the top of the building. Substantial time and effort and money was put into that. Jack Holleran is here. He is the architect. He's going to talk about that to the extent necessary. And in short, it was not feasible. The Applicant is willing to accept the other three conditions that Dan Krasnoff just mentioned, but the two conditions that have to do with saving the facade and working with the glass at the top are just not feasible. The key to this thing is whether or not we're here today to discuss the various criteria. We're prepared to go forward with all of the other criteria and basically address the same issues that we addressed the last time, but we're not sure that it's necessary at this point. We would like to reserve to the extent we can to come back and discuss that if the board feels that it's necessary. However, at this point in time, I think the best thing to do for expedience and to address the specific issues that you raised is to have Jack Holleran come up to the microphone and discuss exactly why we cannot comply with those two conditions. Jack?
Would the board like the photos of the slides I'm going to go through at your desk? No. Okay. What's not on the slides is the feasibility study. I would assume that you'd want a copy of that on the saving the exterior wall.
If you'd like to submit it, you can hand it down to Adana down there, please.
All right. All right, so what's being passed around is the feasibility.
Every 10 minutes that this meeting goes on, the temperature will go up 1 degree.
Well, I'll try to be
I've been
brief.
there before.
All right. Let me start with the slides, and it's pretty much a recap of what Dan has already presented, so I'll go through that very quickly. What I have here is a aerial of the block, and the green is the Tums building. And it's important to note that the Tums building is adjoining that's on the property line, as is the existing building that we're proposing to remove.
Those are actually all Tums colors, aren't they?
They very well may be. The original building that's been talked about, saving the facade, is on the corner, and that's shown in the salmon color. And then the wraparound addition is shown in yellow. So that's our property that we're looking to demolish and build our tower. We are diagonally from Ballpark Village 2, the multifamily, and the garage to the west, and then across the street to the ballpark itself. Okay. This drawing is just to show you make it clear about what was the expansion. So in 1985, the building went under an expansion, and all the areas shown shaded were the expanded and renovated areas of the existing building. Okay, so you can see the 3 bays on Broadway, that is in white is what was requested of us to attempt to save. Okay. This is our proposal for the tower, and you can see it was a glass facade all the way down to the ground plane, and you'll remember that from our last meeting. The board approved demolition of our project with the 2 conditions that I'm here to talk about, and that is that the building be constructed incorporating the north facade and the west facade of the original building, and that all facades of the new tower be at least 75% of glass. I come to find that the Ballpark Village 2 really hasn't gone through any reviews of this board, and I wasn't sure that everyone was clear on what they were doing there. And I really wasn't either, so I really wanted to get into that and find out what they were doing. But here you can see the architecture that's on the west side of the existing Ballpark Village has a combination of glass and brick colonnade for the office building. And then on the hotel, it has a stone base with brick columns up with some glass up on top and in between. So they picked up on a lot of brick across the street with Ballpark Village. I mean, with the ballpark, a lot of couples station kind of to the existing ballpark with using the masonry. And then as I moved to the existing Ballpark Village, there on the left, you can see the brick. They actually there then changed materials totally. And what they have is the tower building set back, and you can see it with glass and concrete. And then on the 6-story garage that's on the corner here is a combination of vertical concrete panels and a wire mesh. And the wire mesh is there to allow open air through the garage so they wouldn't have some fire protection requirements. It's interesting that on Broadway, this project is a straight run of 6-level parking plus a ground plane level of all vertical concrete panels, and then in between it's just horizontal railing, cable railing for vehicle protection and people protection. So that's what we're across the street from on our project. Tyson. So we already heard from Jim that the feasibility study is quite expensive and would really stop this project in its tracks and trying to save the exterior wall. But we didn't know that when we left here, and we really worked hard to work through what is it going to take to build a tower scaffold. What does it take foundation-wise? What does it take steel-wise? How will it work? How will we not destroy the building just trying to support it while we build a new building? So we got busy on that and started working on a design, and I'll go through the study in just a second. But we also said, what if we can't take it down and the city wants a brick base, what if we do a brick base? 7-story brick building of sorts, all new construction at the base, and then the tower up above. Is that picking up the masonry that we've heard so much about and completing the design? So it wouldn't be just the 3 bays across the front, we'd be all the way across the front and then all the way down the Clark Avenue facade. At night it would look something like this with the glazing coming down to the corner, to the ground plane. And we still use the opaque glass for the parking, so we're not looking into a parking garage. But that's an alternative. If you ask me which one I like best, I like our original one best. I think it's more contemporary, and I think at this end of Ballpark Village with what they're doing with their tower and their base, I think it's a good transition into more of a modern glass facade that comes all the way down to the ground plane. This is a closer look at the masonry base. If this was acceptable to the board more than our proposal, that we'd be willing to continue to work with. Now, the feasibility study that I passed around, we spent 6 weeks designing that scaffolding. We engaged Alper Audi structural engineers to work with us on it. We had Gatto Geotechnical Engineering and Construction out of Chicago that does this type of stuff, scaffolding around the exterior of the buildings to save them. We had McHugh Construction out of Chicago, Perry Corporation here in St. Louis, and then a couple big subs, Industrial Steel Fabricators here in St. Louis, look at the quantities and takeoffs and provide cost, and VJ Concrete. And the tower, the shoring tower we call it, is a tower that's built around the outside, and you'll see scaffolding on buildings that are being tuck pointed and things like that, but this is a real structural tower to keep that wall in place. It will close 2 lanes of traffic on the Broadway side. We'll have 56 12-inch diameter micro piles that go 120 feet deep for foundations, extending 10 foot into the rock below to create a base for this thing so it doesn't blow over, topple over, turn over. On top of those piles,
All of which sound like bad things.
it's tough. It's really tough. I thought it'd be simpler, but it's not simple by any means. On top of the piles, we'll have a 48 by 36 concrete beam, and we'll tie that together between the verticals with 2 36-inch by 30 concrete beams. The structural steel for the tower alone, without all the miscellaneous metals accounted for, is 191 tons of structural steel. The inside the wall, we'll have a structural steel inside face that we'll have to through bolt through the wall. We're going to destroy a lot of brick doing that, and then we'll have to come back and replace it, point it, make it look right. And we'll also have to introduce interior structural columns, steel columns. The seismic retrofit is really complicated, requiring the removal of the inside face of the wall and the insertion of steel rebar and grout, both the horizontal and the vertical inside face of wall. So it is a major undertaking. And when Mr. Killeen asked me last time what I thought, I really didn't know until we really got into it with all the experts. Because of the layout, the thickness of that wall that's existing, and the steel inside of it, we'll lose 72 parking spaces. Will take 8 months to build it. Well, that's including permitting it. Take 8 months total. And the total cost on that, $7,727,615, is a construction cost. So that doesn't include engineering and so forth to go with it. So with that being said, and with the report that's being passed around, you can see why we're back here to talk about that exterior wall and ask you to allow us to, if we want to do brick, to allow us to do that, or to allow us to return to the original concept. We also looked at the other stipulation of 75% glass. And the south and the east have the maximum amount of glass now. We're allowed 45% glazing by the building code. And the reason that is because of where the property line is. So we have to get back 10 feet off that property line or we wouldn't have any openings. So we can't make changes on that. And then to change just the north elevation with glazing all the way top to bottom adds a glazing cost of $1,433,250. So that became another challenge in terms of cost for the project. And both of those, and we'll address this financially with Mark Carley when he gets up here, but both of those were non-starters for us. Okay.
Questions? Mr. Killeen?
So the rendering we're seeing here would be
That
all
is
new.
That's all new construction, Mr. Clean. That's all new construction, and it's not a replica of the existing building. It is new construction, working the structural grid, behind it for the that supports the tower all the way up, and trying to get some balance with where those vertical columns are and so forth. Just gave us different proportions on the exterior, but we tried to keep with some of the detailing that's it's similar with the arch at the top, some of the banding, the stone banding, the stone base. So it's similar in some respects.
And is this comparable in cost to your original design, or is this an upcharge too?
I finished this at 2 o'clock, so I don't have a cost on it, but I think will be comparable in cost to what we had presented earlier.
Okay. No further questions.
Would you like photos of these slides? Anybody? No? Okay.
Sure, I'll take them.
Randy?
I really don't have any questions. I have thoughts and feelings, but no, not a question.
Okay, if you end every statement of a thought or feeling
Sure.
with a don't you
Okay.
agree, that would still be a question.
Sure. I really sincerely appreciate the diligence that you put into this and these alternate plans. And I definitely agree with you. If it were between a faux historic brick facade or the existing plan, I would absolutely agree. The contemporary, clean, new construction is much preferable to me. It really wasn't about that. In my opinion, I think it was more about preserving what is possible of a high merit historic building, that the context around it that expressly derives its design. The ballpark is a faux historic design because of the buildings that surround it, and now it looks like it's decimating slowly. But I do appreciate the work you put into this, and I'm sure it's no small task.
Was it?
Don't you agree?
He's like, no.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, do you want these slides?
Yeah, give them down.
Back over here.
Yeah.
I don't think I could have said it any better. But what we have is three alternatives.
You should end that by saying, could I?
Could I? Thank you. Absolutely.
I don't want you to get hurt up here. Metal out of the way.
So you make it through the metal detector with that. So we have the three options. The option number one is to retain the facade, in which case this deal is pretty much dead. Matter of fact, it's a non-starter, as Jack pointed out. And Mark Carley will be able to talk about that. Option number two is the original design, all the glass and steel. And option number three is an attempt on our part to address the issues that you had brought, which is twofold in our mind, maybe one in yours. You had stated that what is primemost in your mind is to preserve something of the past in that existing building. It is the applicant's position that what is there right now has been compromised and corrupted so badly that there's really not much left to it. That over 50% of the building has now been enhanced, and we have with us Mr. Fred Lafser, who is an expert in tax credits and tax and to items to go on to the National Historic Register, and he'll be able to tell you that the building as modified currently is no longer applicable, is not currently, as it stands, eligible for the National Register. Now, it could be placed in a condition where it might be eligible for the National Register. However, what that would mean is we would have to tear down the building to the south, tear down the attached building to the south, tear down the attached building to the east, then reconstruct and restore those walls that were on the south and east side, remove all of the architectural accents which were added to both buildings to make the two buildings look alike, change the windows, change the doors, and by that time the cost of this becomes so prohibitive that there really isn't, it's not a marketable building. Not to mention it's not very utilitarian at that point in time. So what we're asking at this point in time is to reconsider the original drawing, or we would consider working with you on the on our attempt to address your issues to keep the concept of the turn of the century style architecture for this particular project. One more thing I'd like to add is both at this meeting, the last meeting, and multiple times in the newspaper and other media, it's been stated that the the stadium, current stadium, was designed to match this building and other buildings of its type. Well, it wasn't that long ago we had a round stadium, and that round stadium is now sort of nostalgic to other people, and other people said, we wish we could have kept that. I will tell you that historically, we replace our stadium every 40 years, so approximately 27 years from now, we're going to be replacing this stadium, and I venture to ask, will the new stadium look retro, or will it look like the new St. Louis at that point in time? And we seem to think that it'll be looking more like the new St. Louis. I want to ask a favor of the board at this point in time. We have with us Mr. Jerry Schlichter, and Jerry he is not one of our presenters tonight, but he is someone who will be speaking from the audience. If I have to make him a presenter, I will do so, but we need to hear from him right away because he has to get out of the room.
Jerry's an old hand. He's already signed this list.
Very good.
He is the speaker.
Jerry, would you step up?
Sorry to go out of order. I'm a longtime city resident and also have a law firm just a block and a half away from there and go by this building every day for the last 25 years. I'm also co-chair of the Economic Development Committee of the downtown STL, and I wasn't asked to be here by these folks. I said I'd come because I think it's that important as a city resident and really being concerned about where we're going as a city and where we're going with downtown. You know, our best asset, in my view, is our wonderful collection of historic buildings, both commercial and residential. And in the late 80s, the city of St. Louis had a 96% decline in historic rehab because we lost the federal historic credit as it had been. So this is economic development in an older urban area, reviving our historic areas. And as a result of that, I decided to try to do something about that, to create a state historic tax credit, to make these buildings viable. At that time, Washington Avenue was a collection of derelict buildings, every one of which was unoccupied because the numbers simply don't work in St. Louis as they might do in New York City or someplace else without an incentive. Sorry about that. So with a statewide coalition that we put together, I wrote the bill, the state historic tax credit that you, Michael, I know have used very extensively and most of you are probably familiar with. And we got it through. And it's caused $4.5 billion in direct economic development in the city. It's the national model for historic rehab. And both Missouri Preservation and Landmarks have weighed in on the previous hearing about this project. I've worked with them for the last 19 years to keep our historic credit intact. And we're working right now because the threat has never been bigger in the state legislature. So where I come from is a background of passion, as many of you have, about historic rehab being true economic development in our city. Yet here is a situation that's unique, and the staff has determined that it's a matter of unusual circumstances. I would go farther. I would say these are extraordinary circumstances, like you don't see with the average battle in a historic neighborhood or with a commercial historic building. First of all, what's it going to be replaced with? About 400 to 500 city residents, probably a lot of them young people of the type we're trying to attract to our city, and are competing with other cities like Nashville and Indianapolis and Kansas City and Chicago. My own son, who's a millennial, returned from New York City 2 weeks ago to the city, and he's looking downtown, and he said the other day to me, he said, how come there aren't any high-rises like there are in Nashville, like there are in New York, like they're all over the place? I said, well, you know, our downtown hasn't thrived the way other downtowns have. We don't have cranes and construction towers going up. And we also have a competing downtown in Clayton. So there is no other residential building in St. Louis 33 stories tall. This would be the biggest residential historic building, non-historic building, sorry. So these are really, when you weigh the two, in my opinion, and that of the Economic Development Committee of Downtown STL, it's a no-brainer. The merits of this greatly outweigh the loss. And that's coming from somebody who's passionate about historic preservation, as all of you are. The fact is that this, and we had a presentation at our committee from these developers, we're really in St. Louis in a difficult situation for large development like this because the labor costs are higher than they are in a lot of other cities around us. The labor costs are comparable to Chicago, but the rents are not. And so from everything we've been told, the out-of-town money here is already on the fence about this project, and it isn't a slam dunk that this happens even without these two conditions. So delay and higher interest rates that are going up as we speak could imperil this project apart from the two conditions that have been imposed. So I want to say that I think it's important to keep in mind we don't have a lot of cranes. We don't have a lot of options for our city and our downtown to develop. And to have this go under because of the desire to serve a building that's, while historic, I can tell you that having written the state historic tax credit, there's serious question in my mind as to whether the building will even qualify. And I can say because of the additions and so on. And I can say with certainty, just like all these other buildings that were derelict and nothing happened without that incentive of the state historic tax credit. Without historic tax credits, this will sit there for a long, long time unoccupied in place of what it could have been. So with that, again, I urge you to drop the two conditions. It seems to me these folks have been in good faith, and from the standpoint of one city resident who cares deeply about our city, as all of you do, I urge you to allow this to go forward without the two conditions.
Jerry, so because this project is speculative and possibly not likely, you would urge us to keep the condition on that there be a building permit in hand, is that right?
Oh, absolutely, and I think they're willing. We asked about that too, and I think they're absolutely willing to do that. Yeah, we don't want to have a repeat of what we had at 14th and Washington.
I don't care about them, I care about your opinion here.
Right. No, my opinion is that linking this project going forward to making sure that building doesn't come down until they have their financing in hand and ready to go is absolutely an important condition. I agree.
Any questions down here?
No question.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Out of schedule.
Thank you for allowing Jared to speak at that time and go out of line.
Just to be clear, I asked him for tax credits, not a
There you
tax
go.
credit lecture.
Understood.
But this was the choir.
Absolutely. One of the other criteria that are to be reviewed by the board deals with the marketability of the property and its current use and reuse. I have two people here, and both of them will speak very, very shortly, I promise you. One of them is Mr. Paul Zink. Paul Zink is the Vice Chancellor of Finance and Administration for the St. Louis Community College. Paul, you want to talk about the current use of the property?
Thanks, Jim, and thank you to the members of the board. What Jim had just asked me to talk about the building and what the community college has planned for the building. The community college district has owned 300 South Broadway since 1980s, since the mid 1980s when the addition was incorporated into the building. It's been our corporate headquarters, so to speak. In approximately 2011, we moved out of that building a large portion of folks who are our corporate training offices, and so we have been since that time really not very well utilizing the building. They moved to a college facility in the county in Bridgeton for the corporate training function. So our board has asked us on a couple of different occasions to look at the marketability of the building, and a few years ago we were quite into that process with a group who actually had researched the historic tax dollar credits and the cost of redeveloping and refurbishing the building. Maybe take a step back and tell you my office is one of those that's on the corner of that building, and I love the view. I love the city. I love that stadium view. But all I can really see is the back of the scoreboard. If there happens to be a foul ball in a small portion of left field, I might see a catch. But you really can't see the field itself. Most of the people that come to my office are just amazed at the location. But when you look to the north, you just see Stadium Parking Garage East, which is not a very pretty building, and you can't see the arch or anything else. So when we had developers looking at the building, they thought this could perhaps be a boutique office space, maybe a multi-tenant user kind of space. And not less than probably a half a dozen different developers have talked to us about this over the last 4 to 5 years. One explored very deeply the historic tax dollar credits and felt that the building had been compromised enough that they would not be able to get those tax dollar credits. And renovation of this building, while I have an excellent view, when you look inward, it's pretty much a 1980s, mid-1980s era office building. It's not very pretty, so it would require pretty much a gut rehab and just wouldn't be affordable without the historic tax dollar credits, and would require such a high level of rent expense to go forward. It's just not practical given the amount of office space that's available downtown. So we've explored that over time, and the community college has decided to exit the building. We will be moving our 150 or so employees to other college facilities, many of them at Forest Park, still here in the city, some to our Harrison Education Center that's in the city, and some to our other campuses in the county. The community college really doesn't have an educational use of the building. Its upkeep and the cost of operating there is quite high. If you've seen us in the news recently, you know that we, like everybody, are looking at ways to cut operational costs, and that's the reason for selling the building. So we haven't yet sold the building. We're certainly going to continue to try to do that, but without regard for this project, and your decision going forward, we plan to exit the building and move our folks just to save on operating cost. And again, there's just not an educational component to the building. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have about the college's use of the building at this time.
Down this end?
Thank you.
Questions down this end? Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Dean Burns. I'm Vice President at Gundaker Commercial Group. We actually looked at this building some time ago for the potential of renovating it for loft apartments, and determined that because of the configuration with the Tums industrial building on two sides, that we just couldn't make it work. And I am so happy to see this proposal come forward for a great reuse of this site. If this use does not go forward, I think this building, as Mr. Schlichter said, will sit here for a long time. I've prepared a brief office market survey for you, and I'd like to pass that out. So the reuse of this building potentially could be office. The problem that we see in downtown is that no matter how much money you spend on a historic building and how great it looks, the market sees it as a Class B building with Class B rents. And I don't know how to overcome that because, you know, we've been involved in a lot of historic renovation, but right now, apartments seem to work. This building does not work for apartments. Hospitality seems to work. This building does not work for hospitality. Office space, renovated office space does not work. And we have many other opportunities downtown to take care of. Railway Exchange is coming up. AT&T is vacant. 1010 Marketplace is about 35% occupied. We need to focus on some of those things for our office space, and this one just doesn't work very well. Thank you.
Last, in connection with this particular line of speaking, I have with us Mr. Andy Struckoff from PGAV, who prepared the blighting study. He has a couple of comments to make, and consistent with what we just heard. Go ahead.
Good evening. My name is Andy Struckoff with PGAV Planners here in downtown St. Louis. We prepared and wrote the qualifications analysis for the Chapter 353 redevelopment designation for the city of St. Louis. And our job in that case is to observe and report the existing conditions in the current facility. And in so doing, I toured the building, walked around it, took several dozens of pictures. And overall, in addition to some issues as deferred maintenance and lack of ADA compliance, as the general layout and the interior of the building creates a difficulty for an adaptive reuse or reuse of the building as an office space. As Dean and Jack have said, reusing the building would require a gut rehab or some significant alterations at significant expense, which market rents generally do not support doing. Part of the issues are the interior spaces and dimensions don't comply with current building codes or fire codes, and the renovation of the laboratory facilities to make them ADA compliant would bring them out of compliance with the plumbing code. This is just a few of the issues we observed. Do you have any questions for me on the blight study? Thank you.
It was brought to my attention that now we've spoken 3 times about the interior of the building, and we forgot to mention that those of you who have not been in the building, this building has a unique aspect to it. It has an atrium right in the middle of it. Because there are no windows on the south side and on the east side, picture yourself in this building with an office or a workstation that has no windows. So what they did is they created an atrium in the middle of this building, which has failed over the years. It's currently it's about as dark as my garage is at 6 o'clock at night. And it's the concrete, because of the humidity in there, et cetera, the concrete is falling apart and it is non-usable. So even the offices that are on the atrium, what you do is you look out at a wall. That's the wall of the Tums wall. And so the atrium has not worked. And again, I want you to sort of visualize the concept of trying to reutilize this building for this purpose. Lastly, in connection, before I bring Jack Coder up, I want to have Mr. Mark Carley talk briefly about some of the economics on this and to be able to raise money for this project. Mark?
Hi, I'm Mark Carley. I represent the local development team along with our co-developers out of Chicago. My background is in public accounting. I led our construction and real estate industry practice at BDO Stone Carley for over 15 years. There are 5 primary areas of impact of fulfilling the conditions you placed upon the building in the December 18 hearing, focusing particularly on the facade enhancements with more glass and the retention of the 2 historic facades. So there are 5 impacts I'd like to briefly go over with you. One is building functionality. Second is impact on schedule. Third is the cost, the overall cost of doing such things. The revenue impact on the project of what happens, and then the expected returns to the equity investors in the project of implementing those conditions. First, as Jack Holleran mentioned in the design portion, the functionality, we lose 72 parking spaces in the building. That significantly reduces the parking ratio available to the tenants. And collaterally, also stepping ahead, reduces the revenues in the building by $2,000 annually, which has a $1.4 million impact on the value of the building when you use a 6% cap rate. Our schedule will be delayed not just the 8 months that Mr. Holleran mentioned for the actual construction, but it'll be about 12 months total, speaking from a developer point of view. We have 3 months of pre-construction services we have to go through for architecture and engineering design. We then have 8 months of construction of the facade retention, and we have another month impact on the overall schedule for the remainder of the building, so about a 12-month delay. So now I'd like to step into the other 3 concepts: cost, revenue, and return on investment to the equity investors, and why that should matter to this group. Fundamentally, as Mr. Schlichter mentioned, we spoke to his group previously and reported to him that our costs for construction, being a labor town, a union town, are similar, very similar to Chicago. Our revenues, however, for attracting tenants, tenants are just not willing to pay the same for an apartment in St. Louis that they're willing to pay in Chicago. So we're left in this cost return squeeze, and it challenges us to come up with returns that are sufficient to attract the equity capital needed to do this project. And the reason it's particularly acute is that a project of this type in this city, which is now considered a 2nd to 3rd tier city by outside investors, it's not my fault, sorry for the bad news, but those investors require about 300 basis points higher rate of return on their money to be in the risk of investing in St. Louis than some other metropolitan 24-hour city. That becomes very difficult for us to do, even with the tax abatement that we've been given by the Board of Aldermen. We just barely get to the rates of returns. If we then go, and I'd like to go into the costs, the total costs of your request, the facade preservation, as Mr. Holleran reported, is $7.7+ million. The increased glazing on the north elevation of the building, $1.4 million. But here's some additional costs. The cost to design all of that is about another $900,000. Revisions to the design on the original building is another $250,000. And then because we've extended the construction period by 12 months, we'll have cost escalation under our guaranteed maximum price contract provisions that will increase because costs are going up in the construction materials and the labor. We're looking at another $1.3 million of costs over this additional 12-month period. And then we have the cost of our debt financing, the carry cost of that, for an impact of another $1.6 million. So the total impact of all costs of retaining the facade and adding glass only to the north elevation is $13.2 million. When we take that and add it to the existing cost that we started with of $100 million, we're now at a $113 million cost. We've reduced our revenues by $82,000 on the loss of the parking spaces. And we have made the returns impossible to attract the equity money that's here.
And we know that because we're in the market now trying to raise the money. And they've told us what they're looking for, and we can't get there with these changes. But to give you an independent look, I used the economic development model prepared by Jonathan Ferry of the St. Louis Development Corporation that was used to present ratification for our abatement request. And I ran these new numbers back through the model. Jonathan's model concluded without these costs, yeah, I'm just done, concluded that we were at the upper end of returns that would be allowable before they'd have to trim back the abatement. Now when I put these costs in, we're below the, he used an outside reference service as to what's an allowable return. We fall below that allowable return. So the returns, even according to Jonathan's model or the city's own model, would be insufficient to attract the capital. So our experience indicates that, his model indicates that, and I prepared a chart for you, but basically I could summarize the project is not viable if we would have to implement those two conditions, and we would have to abandon the project.
Would it be viable in a different location?
Only if we could get rents up, so maybe in Clayton, but not in the city as far as we know. Okay. Any other questions? Thank you.
We have nothing else for the board. Thank you. Apologize for the length of time on it.
Scott Wilson?
Good afternoon. My name is Scott Wilson. I'm CEO of SM Wilson and Company, a 97-year-old regional general contractor and construction manager located at 2185 Hampton Avenue in the city of St. Louis.
Mr. Wilson, it is not your testimony that you are 97, is it?
If it'll help get this project approved, I'm 97.
I was going to ask you what the building looked like when it was new.
I didn't know this would be this much fun up here. It's okay. I'm currently serving my third term on the Architectural Review Board for the city of Clayton, Missouri, and have in past years served as chairman of the Associated General Contractors of St. Louis. My point is that I've been at this for a long time. I understand the building side of life and the development side, and I was anxious to speak on behalf of this project when I heard about it. During my 34 years at SM Wilson, I've participated in the growth of certain industry segments, such as retail, healthcare, and senior living. While growth in certain segments has been good for our business, I would suggest that the growth of any particular segment is not indicative of what has occurred or is occurring throughout the St. Louis metropolitan area. Our business became strong because we as business people made it strong. We took enormous risks. As a result, we prospered. As a regional builder, we are exposed to construction projects in Dallas, Memphis, Nashville, Indianapolis, Chicago, Milwaukee, Minneapolis, and Denver. We have, in fact, completed projects in most of these cities. I would suggest that if you have not been to any of these cities, you should go. Go now, for you will see cities on fire with development and growth. While I have respect for architecture and construction of yesteryear, I have an even greater fear that as we work ever so hard to preserve our past, we will in fact stay in the past, stay in the slow lane, and continue to impede the growth of our city. And I'll stop for a moment there. I helped move SM Wilson from Illinois to Missouri in 2001. Not the county. We deliberately chose this city because I knew this city had the potential to be something. It hasn't gotten there as quickly as I might like it, so consider this a nudge. I think we all collectively have to do everything we can possibly do to improve our city. I think it's also important for the Preservation Board members to know that I have no horse in the race. Normally when I'm standing up here, I want to build something. I'm not stumping for a construction project which I might someday get to build. I am, however, cheering for change in my city that will clear the way for a multitude of projects like that proposed for 300 South Broadway. Architectural preservation is important, but the stipulation that our buildings are still serving our people. With the current occupant moving staff to other offices and the cost of rehabilitation outweighing the potential return, the 300 South Broadway building is no longer serving the people of St. Louis. It is simply a reminder of our prioritization of historic remnants over the prosperity of our city. The developers have gone to great effort to ensure architectural significance to this new structure as well. This will be a beautiful addition to our city streetscape, one that shows the investment and progress our city has made to benefit its people. Being so prominently visible from Busch Stadium and Ballpark Village will show this progress and investment to the visitors and residents alike that St. Louis is a vibrant city with impressive downtown retail and residential offerings. The city remembers the past and preserves it with distinction. But first and foremost, our city must invest in our people and our future. Thank you.
Mr. Wilson, you served on our cousin, the Clayton Historic Review Commission.
I have for 3 terms now.
Looking at the 3 options presented before us, which of them do you prefer? Speaking from your viewpoint on their Historic Review Commission.
If they were willing to somewhat take in the look of the previous building and then continue on up from there, I'd be in favor of that. Not because maybe price-wise it's a little more expensive, but it certainly fits the downtown area, and I think it shows great intent. But you're welcome.
Jeff Daniels? Dennis Bogdanovich?
Thank you, Mr.
What are you doing now?
What am I doing now?
Who have you come to represent?
I am representing the Downtown Neighborhood Association, where I am a board member and a treasurer for the board. I'm here on behalf of Jared Ospel, who told me that he had home repairs, but I think he's just at happy hour. Again, we were here before in December to... I'll wrap up so we can all get there too. Like we did in December, we have supported full demolition of this project with 3 conditions, and I'll just quickly summarize these since I believe you guys have this letter, but I can submit it again. The board would like to see the demo permit held until there is financing and a building permit in place, that the building includes minimum of 10 3-bedroom units, and that there is retail space on the ground floor. Do you need this letter again, or?
Mr. Bogdanovich?
No.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
As long as that's fresh in our mind, do you mind if I ask the applicant if they've met that, or they can meet that?
Absolutely.
Okay. So the question about the 10 3-bedroom units?
Our intention is to incorporate those in the plans.
Thank you. Mr. Carley.
Okay, Bill Hannigan?
Yes, I come before the board just as an ordinary St. Louis citizen, but my family has been here in St. Louis since the 1840s.
The record say your name,
Bill Hannigan,
your address,
5399 Lindell Boulevard.
continue.
And my kids went away to college. They went to school at the University of Dallas. And while they enjoyed their time there, they very much didn't want to live in a city like Dallas.
Are you offering this testimony because you know I also graduated from the University of Dallas?
No, I didn't know that. Well, you got a good education, and it shows, I think. So anyway, they didn't, like Mr. Callow, they didn't want to stay in Dallas. They didn't like Dallas. They wanted to come back home to St. Louis, and primarily because of the historic buildings, the historic architecture, the architecture that's there at 300 South Broadway with its fantastic brickwork. And the one point, and we followed as a family, have followed this issue very carefully in the press. And the one thing I want to point out is that I think the extent to which the building has been aesthetically and architecturally compromised over the years has been overstated. And I think that when I got a picture of the building 300 South Broadway from the Landmark Association, a picture from, I guess, around 1910, I was amazed how little the building had changed and how much it had the same aesthetic feeling to it. Even though, it's typical with old buildings, windows are often replaced, sadly. But, and so I think that this is something that, I think in people's minds, it was the idea that this was a remodeled structure, that this had been compromised, it really wasn't worth it. And I don't think that was true. And I made a copy of the picture that the Landmark Association sent me, along with a picture of a recent picture of the 300 South Broadway that appeared in the Business Journal, and I wondered if I could give that to the board.
Where's Lucy Hannigan?
Right here.
We might as well get all the Hannigans out of the way.
Get them out of the way. They're a lot of trouble. So thank you again. I appreciate all the conversation and the explanation of all the work that you've done on this building, and I too appreciate the investment in the city. It is a shame that in the beginning, I know the investors have put a lot of money into this, and that's one of the aldermen has said that we can't encourage people to invest in the city and then pull the rug out from under them. But I say we shouldn't allow investors to go after our antiquities and encourage them to do that in the first place. So it's a shame that this was an enticement to them. And as far as the remodeling of it, it's a credit to the architecture that the people who did renovate it kept the same qualities in it. So it was a building that was lovingly cared for, and I would ask you not to let it be torn down. Thank you.
Mr. Khan?
Hello, my name is Mobeen Khan. I am the Chief Operating Officer and Vice President of Economic Development at Downtown STL, Inc. And I wanted to...
Is there anybody left back at your office?
There may be a few people. One of the things I wanted to speak about is and urge the board here to approve the project in a position where it is economically viable. A lot of discussion has been had already on the architectural merits, so I won't go into that. One of our key focus areas of our organization is economic development. Some of that has already been covered. One that I will specifically expand on is the catalytic nature of this project. If there were 10 other projects like this, we probably would have had a different conversation, but there aren't. And the reason is it's very challenging. It has been for some time, very challenging to attract new construction projects in downtown. And main reason, which was alluded to by some speakers before, is the revenues you can expect. The rents rate, particularly in residential, are substantially lower than what this project will bring it to the market. And that shows what developers can actually build and do and deliver into the market. This project alone is being watched by some of the other developers that are looking into the market, whether the ones that are being announced, Railway Exchange, Jefferson Arms, a new parking lot that was purchased by a Nashville developer. All of them are looking as to what is really viable here. If this project goes through, that in one way would be that catalytic sort of momentum defining project that can probably allow many of the other projects that we wish to see in downtown happen. It was mentioned here before that we are competing with many other cities for residents, for investments, for businesses. And all of those other cities, as was pointed out before, if you visit, there are cranes everywhere. And here, until Ballpark Village Phase 2, you could see, there was no new office construction in 30 years. And that speaks to, if we are competing nationally or internationally, what is viable in downtown. And it's not just this project alone, in terms of residential, the kind of retail that it can attract, the kind of businesses it can attract, it will be that momentum defining project. So I would urge the board to approve the project in a way where it is financially feasible, economically feasible, because as the market conditions are changing, and Jerry alluded to that earlier, there is a very limited short amount of window where this can be done before the money that is going to be going in here, as it compares all the other markets, we may not be able to make it work. It may be on the brink as is, but who knows? So that will be my testimony on this. Thank you very much. Yes?
I want to make sure I understand your testimony.
Mm-hmm.
Are you warning us that people who own other historic buildings downtown that are contemplating their renovation will come before us and ask to tear those buildings down too? Is that what they're watching us for?
No. What I am saying is that if a project is done in one way, all the other projects, whether it's Railway Exchange or Jefferson Arms, all the others, they are being developed based on what are the market conditions proven right now. So if the market conditions say today that rental, residential rental, there is no comparable that goes $2 a square foot. So you have to make a project, you have to develop a project that is not shooting for the skies, that is just trying to do what is available. One of the things that, as we talk to developers, as we talk to all the other folks, one thing that comes up often is the lack of comparables. This building, if you look for comparable project to the one that is proposed, there isn't any. So what you will see is what has been done so far.
What about the one across the street?
The one across the street, that's in the Ballpark Village Phase 2, right? So that is a project in and of itself. Whether it was the first phase or the second phase, it's really the second or the first independent project that is outside the ballpark. That's why the location is important. I know you asked the question earlier, can it happen elsewhere? I don't know, but I would guess probably not. And when this one gets done, then you may make the argument that, okay, the other one can happen because it's still within the same general area of downtown. Does that answer your question?
It does. You're not warning us about the South Kings Highway, the North Kings Highway project, are you?
All I'm saying is that this project is catalytic in its impact in the sense that it will push the revenue projections, it will push the rents higher, it will help tax base of downtown and the city grow, it will bring new investment which may be sitting on the sidelines as of now.
Mischief on this side? Any mischief on this side? Thank you.
All right.
Mr. Hanafi? I've asked all my questions, so you're going to be okay.
It's fine. You can ask. Hello again. You know what I'm going to say, but I'll try to say some from a different angle. Unlike the baseball fans who will be sitting under the western sun when it hits this giant mirror, I'm not blinded by this project. My convictions stand unmoved.
Do that one again. That was good.
I figured I'll do something creative. But, there would be no Downtown Inc. or Downtown Neighborhood Association had there not been a preservation effort marching up Washington Avenue. The way the city is coming back, and I've said it so many times, it's from the small, hard work, building by building, preserving the legacy. And if you don't do that, you try to do harm as you progress, you're kind of going 2 steps forward, 1 step back. St. Louis is rich in very historic neighborhoods, and I live in one of them, and I love it. So when you come downtown, you expect this, sort of finale of, the crown jewel of the city, and it just fails to do so because decisions like this, repeatedly over the last 100 years, have left us very poor in a sense of place. So had this project been proposed in any other vacant land anywhere in the city, we wouldn't be having this meeting. I'm going to repeat that. All the benefits that you're talking about, the residents, the retail, the narrative, all that would still happen in a different site. And to think that, oh, in a 250-year-old city, we only have this window of 2 years to build something, and beyond that, we'll all die. No, that's not true. I mean, there'll be another project 100 years from now, maybe, and it's okay for us to be calm and say, maybe the city will thrive long after we're gone, but your decisions will impact that future. And I wish more people understood that. I wish more people didn't think that we're just one more demolition away from salvation. I wish Cultural Resources knew this. I wish the Preservation Board held that at the highest standard. So, thank you.
Questions on this end? Questions on this end? Thank you.
Thank you.
Jerry Conley?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. I'm here speaking on behalf of Team TIF regarding this project, and what drew my interest to it originally was...
Name, address.
Oh, Jerry Connolly, 3849 Botanical in the Shore neighborhood. So what originally drew me of interest to this was attending the LCRA meeting back in December, which was the day after your original review of this project. And at that point, there's a resolution, and LCRA approved a blighting study and redevelopment plan, and that was then forwarded on to the Board of Aldermen. For those who aren't aware of it, it's a 5-person board. One of the board members works for the community college, so was in a position where he was abstaining on that decision. The developer at that meeting also said, in addition to the 20 years of tax abatement, that he would be seeking in the future the construction sales tax exemption, so basically on purchasing construction materials for the project. And that saving, again, as mentioned at that meeting, was somewhere in the region of $3 to $4 million, which is considerable. So just echoing on the previous witness's point, it feels like with this project that by destroying a potentially building of merit for the historic register, we're using a decision to destroy a building plus a tax abatement incentive that's worth somewhere in the region of $15 to $25 million, depending on how you do the calculations. We're using that incentive, and it's going to end up triggering other demolitions downtown if developers feel that the only site viable by proximity is an existing historic or potentially historic building, rather than seeking out. There are plenty of other vacant lots available in downtown. And at last week's Aldermanic HUD's committee, Alderman Ogilvie, who sits on the committee, drafted a letter that was discussed by the committee that he wanted his fellow members to send to the St. Louis Development Corporation, highlighting kind of the issue of the lack of planning downtown, the lack of coordination in terms of having a demolition on one hand and an allocation of incentives on the other. I don't know if this board has received a copy of that letter yet, or if it has been sent from the Board of Aldermen to SLDC, but I think that's something that, as commissioners, you should take a look at. The blighting study, I think, having looked at some of the photos that went with it, I feel this building has, yes, it might not be ideal, but I think it could be saved and reused functionally. Probably not at the kind of rents that other offices might go for in the area. But I think some of the contents of that blighting study are basically bogus. If you look at the photographs, there's a picture of the brickwork. If that brickwork is deteriorating and needing repair, probably 95% of the brick structures in the entire city would qualify as being blighted. And then just kind of a point of procedure, I guess, in how this board operates. Is the ordinance that you're operating under, do you need to have an ordinance that's in effect from the Board of Aldermen? Because my understanding as of Friday was that Mayor Cruzen had not signed Board Bill 250. So my question is, are you in a position to vote on the resolution before you if that board bill has not actually been signed by the mayor?
We are.
You are? Okay.
However, I do not know if the criterion that says redevelopment plan in place is not met unless it's an ordinance.
Okay. So I'm not a legal expert on this, but I just wanted to highlight,
There are plenty of other criteria for us to look at.
Okay, okay. And then my final point, I'm standing at the speaker's podium, but I read the project right up from the staff, and the first 7 stories of the building are essentially a parking garage with some very fancy cladding on the outside. I don't know how much 2 facades worth of 7 stories cladding costs. My understanding is that $30,000 a parking space and 250 parking spaces, that's about, $7.5, $8 million parking garage. So incorporated in this budget, there's $6 million to buy a building and tear it down, and $8 million to build a parking garage. And one of the blighting obstacles of the blighting study said was the lack of availability of parking for this building's reuse. So I think it's ironic that our lack of planning is leading us to both incentives and tearing down a very valuable building that, the space occupied by that building will now be occupied, by luxury cars for apartments that are going to be renting from $2,000 to over $3,000 a year, a month. So I'd urge you not to permit this building to be torn down. Thank you.
Fred Lafser?
I waive my opportunity if that's interest of time.
Hey, just to make the pun work, would you just wave at me? Excellent. Andrew Weil. Okay. Alderman Coder?
Thank you, Chairman Callow, members of the Preservation Board. Appreciate your time and your patience this evening. I'll be brief. I guess I'll end where Jerry I'll start where Mr. Conley sort of ended with this redevelopment plan. As you're well aware, there is a redevelopment plan passed by the Board of Aldermen, also by the LCRA and the Planning Commission, which calls for the total demolition of this structure. If you don't have a copy of it, I can pass mine around. Section 8A.
We're making notes over here. What date was it passed by the Planning Commission?
I don't have that date in front of me. Mr. Rowe, do you know?
That was approved by me at the end of January.
Okay, end of January. I believe Section 8A has the redevelopment, which calls for the demolition of the building. Under your ordinance for demolition permits in a plan review district, we're looking at a redevelopment plan previously approved by ordinance or adopted by the Planning and Urban Design Commission, which I believe we have the latter. Obviously, we've passed the ordinance at the Board of Aldermen. It's on the mayor's desk, has not yet been signed. You've heard from plenty of folks who are stakeholders downtown, both Downtown St. Louis, Inc., the Downtown Neighborhood Association, comprised of residents from all of the wards downtown. They are in support of this project. I stand here as the alderman for downtown, very much in support of this project. I'm also the alderman from four neighborhoods that are historic review districts. And so I obviously take the historic preservation of our city and our neighborhoods very seriously. In this instance, as was previously pointed out, in previous hearings, this architect has other buildings downtown which we have gone to great lengths to preserve. The LaSalle building, currently being redeveloped right there on Olive and Broadway, is an Isaac Taylor building. The Municipal Courts building as well, which is slated for redevelopment, are both very noteworthy buildings. In this instance, what I think we are creating is a new, very noteworthy building, and a building that will change the skyline in downtown, bring hundreds of residents to the downtown corridor, and I think complement nicely the tower going up across the street, the 29-story tower in Ballpark Village Phase 2. And it's my hope that, with these two projects, they do serve as a catalyst for future development downtown. I would like to see that vacant parking lot that was paid $9 million, was paid for it a few years ago, developed in the near future as well. And someday maybe we can be talking about getting rid of that hideous parking garage next door and creating mixed use with buildings, but we're not there yet. I would speak also to just planning in general downtown. One of the things that this project has taught us is the need for more comprehensive planning in downtown. Downtown's still operating off of a Downtown Now plan from 20-something years ago. HUD's, the HUD's committee, of which I serve on as a member, we all signed a letter the other day asking SLDC to work closely with Downtown St. Louis, Inc. to develop a proper new downtown plan, form-based code plan for the entire downtown district. I think when we get that done, it will show, with this project underway and the Ballpark Village project, that there's obviously a demand for high-rise living in this section of downtown. So I hope in the future we'll have more towers in this area. So with that, I would say, please follow the ordinance. We have a redevelopment plan passed by the Plan Commission, and please approve the demolition of this project. I most certainly want you to approve it with the conditions regarding financing, so we don't wind up with, and building permits, so we don't wind up with obviously a vacant parking lot downtown. We don't need any more of those. Thank you for your time and consideration. Yes, questions? Sorry.
Looking at the three options.
Yes.
Which one do you like?
I like the original option the most. I think the brick facade in the third option today is interesting, but I'd prefer the glass building. I think just aesthetically it's more pleasing, the more modern design.
Second question, were you the sponsor of the redevelopment plan?
The board bill containing the redevelopment plan, yes, I was the sponsor.
So I read an article in the newspaper, the mayor said she would decide whether to sign it or not based upon what we did.
The mayor holds this, as do I, we hold this board in high regard.
But what did that mean?
You'd have to ask her that. But now I did say it, the Board of Aldermen, and I guess I'll repeat it tonight. I said this on the floor, so it's obviously public. If the demolition of this building's not approved, the project's dead. Thank you.
It was approved before you got here.
What's that?
It is approved.
I understand. I guess the new application, or reapplication, whatever we're calling this. Yeah. Thank you.
Questions down here? No. Questions down here?
No.
Thank you.
Dan? I usually go by the number of times you cross and uncross your legs and arms as to whether or not you want something to say.
Well, I did have one other thing to add for the record, and that is that when we discussed this matter in December, we talked, there was a lot of discussion about the condition of the building permit in regards to the relationship to the proposal to demolish the building. And since that time, I've had a conversation with Frank Oswald, the building commissioner. I believe that can be easily coordinated and will be coordinated. And there's no question in my mind that if the board were to go ahead and approve the demolition of the building, that we could coordinate, we will be able to coordinate the granting of the building permit as a matter before a demolition permit would be authorized.
Barbara, question for you. Assuming the applicant accepts this board's decision, what happens next? And then, assuming that they disagree with the decision of this board, what could happen next?
Well, I mean, I suppose they could take any number of equitable plans, and I'm not going to advise them. At this point, there's been no action of the building commissioner. At the point there's an action of a building commissioner, then there is an appeal process under Chapter 356 of the state statute.
Is that clear to everyone? No?
So if we vote to deny them this, what happens? They go, the mayor signs that bill, they just go tear down their building anyway, right?
I don't want to speculate as to what.
I can't answer that, I'm just trying to understand.
Further questions? Okay. Commissioner Colleen, you have a motion?
I'm very much torn on this. So I move that we take a 5-minute restroom break.
Thanks.
Okay, it is hot. We've gone a long time. We'll take a short break. Commissioner Hamilton, do you have a motion?
Yes. My motion is that the Preservation Board grant preliminary approval of the demolition of the building for the construction of the high-rise apartment building with the condition that demolition approval is withheld unless the Cultural Resources Office is presented with the construction permit, and we want to see financing in place approved by the building division that reflects the plans presented to the Preservation Board and documentation of the construction financing. I guess it was already in there.
Did you get that?
Yes.
Is there a second?
A second.
Motion made and seconded. Discussion? Commissioner Hamilton.
I've been listening to everyone. I've been thinking about this actually since you guys came to us in December.
Directed here.
Oh, sorry. Sorry. I just think, just looking at both sides, I feel that from the community colleges testimony in terms of that building's going to be vacant, they've tried for numerous years to get tenants in there, as well as the vacancies are increasing downtown office space. The viability of this space for rental purposes and et cetera. The need for a building like this is huge if we're going to move forward. Someone said something about moving forward as a city. We're not losing our culture. We can't be nervous or scared to lose our culture by trying new things or expansion. So I am very much for this plan. I'm very excited if it passes, because I feel like, especially the millennials really want something like this so we can compete with Clayton.
Now, I know that you're a realtor.
I am.
You should find that guy from the community college who likes this office view.
Yeah.
I bet that he would like an apartment there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've spoken to people about the Ballpark Village Phase 2. There's people in the county that live in Kirkwood and St. Charles, and when I posted the Ballpark Village Phase 2, they were saying, I want to get a penthouse, for the weekend, so on and so forth. There's so much excitement about.
Fancy realtors.
Yeah. I don't know, but I just feel like St. Louis can go so much further, and I feel like this is a start, and especially because with the project I think they've done their due diligence by doing their research and looking at the options and the suggestions we made and coming back prepared. And I feel because they've done all of that, and with all the testimony that's come forth, I just feel extremely confident that this project should move forward. So.
Commissioner Robinson shaking his head back behind you.
Actually, no, I wasn't.
Was it just loose?
It was about to tip over. It's kind of. Well, I was in favor of the project back in December as designed, and I am still in favor of the project as designed.
Is this your I told you so?
Yeah.
Yes. And we could have done this 2 months ago and got this process started quite a bit earlier. But now that there has been additional financing thrown into this just to get us where we should have been 2 months ago, I think, as she said, the due diligence has been done. Yeah.
talking out some feelings. This is, I'm deeply, deeply conflicted.
Any questions?
No, okay. Well, I also, as I stated before, really impressed with the due diligence. I think it took a lot of effort to come up with those alternate renderings. There's still a lot of real, moral dilemmas I'm facing. Number one, we're all in favor of this project. I think not in favor of it at that location at the expense of a building that has been there a lot longer than all of us. And I do fail to see how this same project could not be equally as successful on another site. I do understand market conditions and certain sites are available at certain times at certain prices. I get that, just talking out. The point was made a number of times about how St. Louis doesn't have as many cranes as other cities like Dallas or Nashville, as if we want to emulate Dallas or Nashville. Those are cities I run the other way from at top speed. They have no soul. St. Louis has a soul. It's got urban fabric that reflects an era when it was one of the leading cities in the United States for most of its history. That's an amazing legacy, and it comes with a high threshold and a great deal of responsibility. I've heard people dismissing the 1980s atrium architecture of this building. The Wainwright building also has suffered the same fate. I don't think that would be a candidate for demolition. The old post office plaza, the Century building, was taken down because the new garage that was built in its place promised to be a catalyst for more development downtown. I think it was a lot more vibrant before with the vacant building there. I don't think that has kept its promise as being the panacea. I think the argument that we have to lose one building to gain something else, I think that's been proven time and again to be a falsehood. And I also, just like, I've read articles in the press about the Preservation Board being obstructionists or being impediments to progress. I think it's very important for everyone to recognize that the Preservation Board's number one duty is to protect the built environment in preservation review districts, number one, first and foremost, and we would not be doing our due diligence if we didn't scrutinize every aspect of these projects, because we are going to be stuck with whatever decisions are made for a long time to come. And they do not build cities like St. Louis anymore. Every other city that we've mentioned as being like the example to emulate, they would all kill for 1 square mile of what we have in this city. And if this building here constitutes the classic definition of blight, then I don't think any building in the city wouldn't also qualify for that designation. That said, I want to see new construction in the city. I do understand the cost-benefit analysis, and I do understand that what replaces an historic building should be of greater value, equal or greater value. And I think reluctantly, this project does qualify for that in this very rare instance. I only hope that there is more emphasis on future development on the many vacant lots and underutilized parcels in our immediate downtown area. Those should be targeted first. And I think I've said it. I'm like a little verklempt over this whole thing right now because this is a really tough one. And I think it's a slippery slope. I think that's where I see.
In my daydream,
Mm-hmm.
the vote is 2-2, and I call on you for the tie-breaking vote.
Oh my God.
So we'll watch and see what happens there.
Oh.
Colleen, this is a different motion than the one that we approved in December.
Yes, sir. That's true. Well, I want to applaud the development team for going to the big effort to explore this idea. I know that doesn't come cheap, so much appreciated. And also that throwing out a third option for a facade design, I think, is commendable. A moment ago, I said I was torn on this. I think what it comes down to for me, it's a shame that our motion from 2 months ago wasn't affordable. And since it is not and would kill the project, to me, it falls back on the notion that these buildings just aren't coming back. And so I would vote to keep the building. So, and have the project find a new home. So.
Alderman, anything?
I don't have any comments.
Okay,
Just ready to vote.
commissioners? There's a motion on the floor. It's been made and seconded. Commissioner Hamilton, do you vote yes or no?
Yes.
Commissioner Robinson, do you vote yes or no?
Yes.
Commissioner Killeen, do you vote yes or no?
No.
Commissioner Kennedy, do you vote yes or no?
Yes.
Commissioner Vines, do you vote yes or no?
I could abstain and it's motion carries, but I reluctantly vote yes.
That is 4 yeses, 1 no, the motion carries. Okay, let us move on to 4384 McPherson.
How do you?
We are 2 months delayed. What I am sure is tens of thousands, if not $100,000 worth of.
Everyone's gone.
You want to call it? Hold 1 second, please.
Yes, it would. We're here on this one? No, you were the tying vote. You were the deciding vote.
Thank you, Don.
Pass it as the other way.
Hi, this is Tiffany Hamilton.
Tiffany Hamilton. Nice to meet you. Okay.
I was just talking
Roger.
this. No. So, don't leave.
Oh.
Amen.
Thank you.
Ready? What happened to C?
It'll be.
Everything has been
But no.
deferred at the request of the applicant.
It was gonna go like that.
Yeah, that's why we're like.
Okay, this is 4384 McPherson. It is a proposal to construct a detached single-family house on one of 2 adjacent vacant lots. It's the one on the right that you see in your screen. This is the site. It's a very unusual shaped site. The building will have 2 visible elevations. On the proposed site plan, the garage is towards the center of the property. I was telling you, it's just not against the standards. And this is the proposed building. It is contemporary design, as you can see, but it also is compatible in scale and proportions and in detailing as far as roof shapes and the proportions of the openings. While it does deviate from some functioning of the windows and the pattern of the fenestration, that is not a requirement under the Central West End standards. You know. There is one concern that the staff had, and that is the sided area on this elevation, which is the eastern elevation and will be exposed to the street because of the vacant lot next door. There are no current plans to develop that lot. And the standards say that materials should be similar to the rest of the block. This is the other side, which will be up against an existing house and will not be visible. Okay. So this is a shot showing, a rendering showing generally the exposure of the eastern facade in the streetscape. I believe that the architect has done another rendering to try to mitigate that. Another concern was the material that would be around the front entry. It will be a zinc panel, and these were the examples that were submitted. to show what that material will look like. This is the this is the context to the east of the site and to the west of the site. You can see the large high-rise building at the corner and directly opposite. So there's a variety. You can see that the front gables are there. There's a variety of roof shapes and roof brick color and materials. So the staff is recommending approval as presented with some mitigation to screen the siding on the eastern elevation. And I believe that the architect will address that. I'd like to submit 2 letters, one from the Alderwoman in support of the project, and one from the Central West End Development Committee, also in support with the staff's recommendation of our review of final materials and plans.
Questions for Jen?
Yeah, 2 questions for you, Jan. So, all right. So, in the renderings, it looks like there's a small window that is occurring
Yes.
up on the 3rd floor, but in the elevations that doesn't exist.
I think that we need to ask Sarah about that, because there was some question of whether there would in fact be an opening there. There will be a brick pattern that she can explain further in the filling the gable.
Sure.
So,
Okay, and then, but my second question, and maybe the applicant can help with that, is, so it looks like we've got what essentially is a 2-story.
that's correct. It's not a full
Yeah.
half-story.
And then a 1-story back behind it of some sort. And what's the depth of the 2-story facade?
The depth of the 2-story is that relative square on the left of the site plan. You can see it maybe better here.
Okay.
Questions done on this end?
No questions.
I thought so, unless she's had a technical difficulty.
I can't find it. Ah, got it.
Nope.
Nope. Help.
This one you set, Sarah?
Yeah.
Sure.
There you go.
You still have questions for the applicant? Okay. Where is either the owner or the applicant, or the architect? Either one. Anyone. Who are you?
What's that?
Who are you?
I'm Sarah Gibson with UIC,
And your address?
1607 Tower Grove Avenue.
We have some questions. Commissioner Robinson. Tony.
Yes. Okay. So, let's start with any fenestration or lack thereof in the 2.5-story space. what is or what is not happening there.
Are you asking me to describe what type of windows, what type of materials?
So right now, what I'm looking at. What I'm looking at
Architect discussions, just like curling.
seems to lack detail.
Hey, Richard, that's why you never see any television dramas about us. Rebar.
So,
Like missing a window or?
I think that to say that it lacks detail, I've included several precedents within the neighborhood and on the street, which has a pretty eclectic collection of buildings, of house types, typologies. Across the street, there are, and I do think that it is a more contemporary design.
So I have no issue at all with
Mhm.
contemporary design, and I live in the 4200 block of McPherson, just for the record.
Mhm.
But I'm sorry, go ahead.
And I think that while you might find that there's, well, I don't know. I guess I'm trying to understand where you say it's lacking detail. If I compare it to other buildings on the street, especially the ones directly across the street that are included in this presentation, the facades are quite simple, very straightforward, and are symmetrical, almost symmetrical in nature, with the exception of a side porch. And this, while we're not required a model example, we have taken these as inspiration. So those buildings across the street have French doors, and while we might not have divided lights in what we're considering kind of French doors, then they are of very similar proportion and respect very much building heights, also fenestration sizes, and I think that I don't think the lack of detail puts this building out of place on the street. I also think that we've paid special attention not only to that fenestration size, the floor-to-floor heights. We've also added corbelling to the gable at the top of on the third story, or the implied third story building. We've also, which is a very intricate. Is a very intricate pattern. Is it like anything else in the street? Is it mimicking some other sort of historic pattern? No, but I think it has the intricacy, the detail, and the quality that is very similar to other buildings on the street. So I think we have added the detail that brings this project to the quality of its historic neighbors. I would mention that specifically, that the gable detail, but also the side porch that turns the corner on the west side of the building. That is being clad in zinc panels. This is not necessarily seen so much on the street, but that is considered a very high-end material, seen very much in historic architecture. Maybe not on this street, but other places in St. Louis, also more so in probably in Europe, but that's where that material got its start, is on roofs in Paris. That's where VM Zinc, the company that we are getting the zinc from, that is where they got their start. They've come over here, and generally you'll see this material in very high-end buildings. It weathers very nicely, and it's a very high-quality product. So, and in that way, I feel like we've, in both the massing and the detailing on the facade, we have been very thoughtful about the amount of detail which has gone into this facade, and to me it seems appropriate and very much in line with the other buildings on the street.
So I have seen, but I'd like to see photos of the other buildings. I think it's lack of fenestration in the gable. When I say lack of detail, I mean it seems to me as if it is trying to perhaps emulate what currently exists, except it doesn't in detail, and every gable that you'll see there on the street has fenestration. It finishes that sort of historic design, and it seems like you're caught in between contemporary and historic, and if it's contemporary, then it's contemporary. But if you are taking sort of historic forms, then it lacks detail.
Now I know why there's more than one of us on this board. You're messing with my favorite part of that building. I like that part. Little spots go up there like that. I like that a lot. I thought that was great detail.
Okay.
But
Looks like a lot of.
why there's more than one of us. You have
Looks like
further
a
questions?
lot of gable, but no, that's.
Anybody else have questions?
Do you want to address this fence?
Oh, the exposure of the, sure. So, Jan, if you don't mind going to the site plan, because I wanted to.
Can I?
Sorry. I just want to address the proportion of the second story, the two-story portion of the building relative to its neighbor. We are.
There we go. Oops, sorry.
So, obviously, the rendered plan is this proposed single-family home, and where you see there's a long bar with a dividing line down the center, and where you see the horizontal line is about 25 feet back from the front of the building. So, and I just want to point out that it's similar, while it's shorter than its neighbor to the west, that I think that it's comparable in size, and that is the portion of the building that we will be cladding in brick, both on the east and on the west sides. So, and so that also brings up. So I wanted to begin with that in sort of discussing where the fence and where the back portion of the house, which is one story, will be screened. So, sorry, Jan, for the scrolling.
Where would you like to go now?
It's a good thing you got our highest tech-savvy person there.
I know.
I beg your pardon.
I said highest tech-savvy person, although the tone was questionable.
But if you don't mind scrolling, we have another view which is looking from the east to the west, and which shows where we will have a screened portion of the house. So this is looking at the east side of the house. The brick returns, like I said, to the back part of the two-story portion of the building, and then there will be a wood fence, which is a typical residential wood fence, which it will be 6 feet high, will be screening the back portion of the house, and should the adjacent lot, while Jan mentioned that it is not slated for redevelopment at this point, given the activity in Central West End, the fact that it's one of the only lots left on the block, I anticipate that, I think we can anticipate that there will be redevelopment there sometime in the near future, at which point this will really become kind of an insignificant issue. But not that we wouldn't be cognizant of the fact that for now, while this building remains exposed, that we want to do the most attractive thing that we can do to the building.
Tony? Tony again. Back to Tony.
No.
Dan, you okay with that fence? Jan?
I'm gonna have to check the standards, but I.
Yeah, I like that.
We can show wood to the street?
I have done it.
He has those
You
fences.
did it?
I have done it
West
many a
End.
times.
Did you get a
On
permit?
his new.
Yeah,
Yes,
you're
I
a
did.
maverick. That doesn't tell us.
Yes, I did.
But we can put wood on the street like that?
Oh, yeah.
Randy, anything? Is there anybody here to testify against this? Hearing none, then Commissioner Killeen, have you got a motion?
I do. I move that the Preservation Board grant preliminary approval for this project with the stipulation that the parking be accessed only from the existing driveway adjacent to the site, and that final documents and exterior materials be reviewed and approved by the Cultural Resources Office.
Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion?
I think it's a good-looking project.
I think it's a good
I
looking.
think it's cool.
I like it.
It's daring.
Yeah.
Can I make a comment? I
Don't need one.
Only one?
Don't need one.
Oh, she's invested so much.
Let's approve it or disapprove it, and then she can comment.
Okay.
Motion on the floor has been made and seconded. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed?
Opposed?
Motion carries.
I move we let her make a comment.
You can't move that, but would you like to make a comment?
The reason why there's just a small area that's 2 stories on the first floor, we're looking to age in place. I currently live in a 4-story house, basement, first, second, third floor, and I'm tired of going up and down the stairs. I want everything on one floor, but we had to fit into the neighborhood, so that's why we have the second floor and the gable.
Look
And
down
the
the board,
gable.
look down the board and talk to that guy down there.
Yeah,
Okay.
we don't
Doing that, so everything else will be on the first floor.
So that portion I get, and again, I live a block down from you, and so I walk past there often.
No.
And it just without some sort of fenestration on that third floor, I will tell you, it reminds me of suburban homes that have really tall pitched roofs and a bunch of space in the gable, but nothing there.
Find me that suburb. I'd like to live there.
I'd be happy to show it to you.
I like this one. I think it fits in nicely.
Okay.
Hey, most of us like your house.
Yeah.
A lot.
They don't live near the house, but
Good.
Welcome back.
Yeah.
Okay, let's do the very patient 22-20-22. 22-20-22 Menard.
What happened to C? Because there were so many people in front of it. This is a long meeting.
that's an ugly house.
I like it.
It's ugly as hell.
Okay, well, this is 2220 to 22 Menard in Soulard. Originally, about a year ago, this was before you as a mixed-use commercial residential property. This is the site of the explosion at Star.
They're proven firm.
So the owners have now intended to build their own single-family house on the site, rather than the mixed use that you looked at before. So, this is the site. There's one existing building on it. This is the proposal, a large L-shaped structure that is selected 2 different model examples to make it appear to be 2 different houses attached to one another. This is the model example for the Menard Street. And this is the model example for the Shenandoah elevation. See that it is a substantial building, but it does fit the model example with the exception of, I probably can't get this to work either. This window here is meant to provide light to a basement stair, but I think the staff feels it's important that the regular fenestration of the model example be continued here. So we would like to see that altered. Other than that, it's fully brick on those sides that are going to be visible, and it complies with the standards. Here's the streetscape on Menard. Be looking east.
The project.
And the streetscape in Shenandoah. Very quickly, the surrounding area, the site is in the left photo at the back. And then on the right, we're looking north along Menard. The opposite street on Menard. You can see there's a very large variety of different shapes, heights, building types, but mostly they're all brick. Staff is recommending approval with the stipulation that the window fenestration be revised on Menard and the usual requirements of final approval of exterior materials and final plans by the staff. I should say that I have not heard from the Soulard Restoration Group. The alderman was here, and he would like to be sure that they have the opportunity to take a look at it, although he is in general support of the proposal.
Questions?
No, Jana.
Question. Is there anybody here to speak against this? Is there anybody? Questions for the applicant? Hearing none. Commissioner Killeen, have you got a motion?
I have one question, actually. I used to pay my rent in this building. Was it inspired by what was there at all?
Well, it was two buildings when the real estate company was in there, and then it was tied. They were tied together by that funny little atrium space.
That's where I paid the rent.
That
Yeah.
had the glass roof and everything. Yeah, that's. I mean, because it was two different buildings that were tied together. That was sort of the inspiration. And that it would be too big, I think, without trying to make it look like two different buildings.
Okay. And have you gotten any kind of feedback from the neighbors or from the alderman?
No, right now we're just doing a preliminary. I'm doing this, then I'm doing a pricing package, and then I'll go, once I get everything that I'm sure is going to be in the final drawing package, then I'll go to SRG. The immediate neighbors, Stars owns all those.
Gotcha.
Except for the one adjacent on Shenandoah, and I did talk to them and show them the plans, and they're in favor of it.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I do have a motion. I move that the Preservation Board grant preliminary approval for the proposed new construction with the stipulation that the Menard fenestration be revised and final details, materials, and plans be reviewed and approved by the Cultural Resources Office.
Second.
Any discussion? Seems to me to be an improvement over what we saw the last.
Yeah, I think so, very much so. Was that yours too?
What's that?
You designed the last one that was in here?
I like this one.
This is my third shot on this site.
Third time's a charm.
This is a nice piece of work.
I like this one. Do you like this
Okay,
one?
there's a motion on the floor, it's been made and seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Commissioners, we need to return to a
Minutes.
little bit of housekeeping. First of all, the minutes from January. Jan, anything to add? Minutes?
May I
Oh, I'm sorry.
add that the minutes should reflect that the director entered certified copies of ordinances 64832 and 64689.
Did he?
Yeah, I mean, per my notes, that was the note that
Did
I
you?
made.
I did.
Okay, yes. Anything else? Is there a motion to approve the minutes as amended?
So moved.
Second.
Anybody opposed? Those will be the minutes. Anything else? Any other business that we need to discuss?
Motion to adjourn. I'm just kidding.
Okay, there's a motion on the floor, has it been seconded?
Second.
Okay, then we stand adjourned.